What's the favorite place in Singapore? I mean, there are probably so many, but something like very special for you and maybe not so obvious.
Oh, that's very, very difficult. Actually, I do love this area here. This is what we call the Civic District, because this is where all the government buildings are and have been in the past. And I do like this particular area because we've got some amazing architecture. You mentioned Asian Civilizations Museum, Victoria Halls, just talked about, and so on and so forth. I think there's a sense of history here. Essentially, this is the part of the island that Sir Stamford Raffles signed for when he came here in 1819. It was rather beautifully sort of described as being within a cannon shot of the water. Exactly what a cannon shot is subject to interpretation, but I believe it's something like half a mile. So this is the part that he really came to trade in, and he was trading. It wasn't colonial. He wasn't colonizing it in 1819. It became a colony much later on. So I'm very fond of the Civic District. I also love Fort Canning.
Fort Canning, yeah, I love it.
Mentioned it very briefly earlier on. I like the fact that you've got the 14th century history there, you've got the colonial history there, you've got the 20th century, you've got military history there. So I really do like Fort Canning very much. But you know, there are some beautiful parks here. I mentioned Makritchie a moment ago. I love Makritchie Reservoir, Sungai Buloh. Oh my gosh, you know, the list is quite long really. Yeah. And then some of the quirky neighbourhoods like Tiong Bahru and Jutiat and so forth are fabulous as well. Yeah, they're not the most obvious ones. I mean, people tend to come here, I want to go to the 3 ethnic neighbourhoods, being Chinatown, Little India and Kampong Glam, the Malay area. Go, okay, fine, they're interesting too, but personally I find some of these other places more interesting. I was only coming up 7 when we actually came across. I still remember vividly arriving in Singapore and how colourful it was and all the different, it was an assault on the senses, you know, as Asia is, in terms of colour, smells, sights, sounds, everything. And yeah, it's very vivid in my memory still, arriving here in February 1963 to live, as I say, in what was then Malaya, which is now part, of course, of Malaysia. Yeah. And we lived here for a few years, and I went to school in JB, and as did my sister, my younger sister, and we loved it, absolutely loved living here. And what's not to love? It's warm. As children, you run around in nothing more than a light dress or a pair of shorts or something. I've learned to swim and just did some exploring within Malaya. We went all over the country, went up to Penang and KL and Malacca and places, stayed in what they called rest houses in those days. There weren't nothing quite so sophisticated as a hotel, generally speaking. There were a few, but generally not. Yeah. And came here to Singapore a lot. And of course, in those days, basically the countries were treated as one country. Even though Malaya had got its own independence in 1957, in effect they were one country. So it was easy. You zipped across the causeway, you came to Singapore, you went shopping, you went to the movies, whatever you wanted to do. And back you went again in the same day, no problem at all. Unlike, unfortunately, today, a little bit trickier crossing the causeway these days, or our second crossing even. And then, of course, 1965 came when Malaysia was formed, and that, 63 came, September 63, when Malaysia was formed. That made it even easier. It was then, you know, formal that we were part of the same country, until 65, August 65, when Singapore came out of Malaysia, which then made life a little trickier because all of a sudden we had to go through immigration and customs and the like going across the causeway. So yeah, you know, I feel that having lived through those years, I really do have a personal appreciation of what went on, as well as an academic appreciation, which, if you like, I have gained from being a guide here in 3 of the museums in Singapore, and now doing what I do, you know, promoting Singapore as an interesting place to come to.
Did you go to a local school?
It was a British Army school, actually. British Army School in JB, Johor Bahru, and later on that became Malaysian Army School. And then later on it became an international school, and it is still an international school. I've been over to check it out, see if it's still around. All the old buildings have gone, it's changed completely, but it is still an international school in Johor Bahru.
I guess JB changed even more than Singapore.
I think Singapore has changed more, really. Put it this way, back in the 60s, when you crossed the causeway, JB, Malaysia and Singapore were more or less at the same level of development. You really couldn't distinguish between the two. When I came back here on a couple of business trips in the mid-90s, I persuaded my colleagues that it'd be a good idea to go across over to JB. And I must admit, I was rather taken aback to see what a difference there was. And this is, you know, about 30 years ago, so things have moved on even further since then. Obviously, Johor is a part of Malaysia which is trying to become an economic development zone, so they're making a lot of effort to try to sort of try to modernise it, trying to put in better communications and so forth and so on and so forth. But essentially, it's still not at the level of Singapore, to be frank. And it's a pity in a way, because I have a great fondness for Malaysia, having lived there. I was just in Penang last week, and I feel there's a nice ambience, if you like, when you go to these countries. A little bit different.